For exactly 50 years, the global public has been comfortably pacified by a highly profitable cinematic ghost story. We have been relentlessly sold the manufactured, theatrical myth of the Bruce Lee curse. To explain the sudden, catastrophic fall of the dragon, the media empire actively constructed a supernatural thriller involving triad assassinations, the mystical dim mak touch of death, and a multi-generational hex passed down through his doomed bloodline. They weaponized this mystical delusion to sell millions of tabloid magazines, to print endless sensationalized biographies, and to keep the box office revenue flowing long after the man was buried in the ground. But the reality hiding directly behind this martial arts mythology is far more terrestrial and infinitely more terrifying. Look closely at the invincible idol of untouchable masculinity. He was globally revered as a living god of supreme physical discipline, an absolute, unrivaled specimen of human perfection who moved faster than the camera lenses of the era could properly capture. Yet on July 20th, 1973, this flawless biological machine abruptly and violently shut down on a bed in a sweltering apartment in Hong Kong. The tabloid journalists immediately spun a dense, impenetrable web of mystical lies to distract the global audience from a brutal, systemic truth. They categorically did not want you to know about the extreme biological sacrifices demanded by an entertainment industry that requires superhuman aesthetic perfection. They actively covered up the desperate surgical procedures, the fatal dehydration, and a physical vessel that was ruthlessly pushed past the absolute physiological breaking point of human endurance. The dragon was not slain by an ancient demon from the shadows. He was systematically and legally dismantled by a corporate machine. Welcome to post-credit. Today, we look past the fake curse to expose the horrifying biological reality and the Hollywood exploitation of Bruce Lee. To truly comprehend the violent physiological collapse of this man, you must first deeply understand the unprecedented, terrifying scale of the product he was forced to become. Bruce Lee was not merely a martial artist or a philosophical pioneer. He was engineered into a multi-million-dollar global commodity. He single-handedly birthed an entire cinematic ecosystem that fed massive production studios, ruthless executive producers, and a relentless, parasitic army of cheap imitators. He shattered box office records across Asia and brutally forced the Western cinematic world to finally pay attention to an Asian leading man. But hiding directly behind the blazing fast kicks, the immaculate choreography, and the televised philosophical interviews was a human being bound by an unspoken, terrifying psychological contract with fame. Entering the 1960s Hollywood landscape, he was met with a wall of systemic, institutionalized racism. When he was cast in the television show The Green Hornet, he was forced to wear a domino mask as Kato, specifically designed to hide his Asian facial features from the conservative American viewing public. He was paid a fraction of what his white co-stars earned, yet he was the undeniable reason the audience tuned in. From that moment, a dark seed of hyper-perfectionism was planted in his psyche. He realized that to survive and conquer a system actively designed to marginalize him, he could not simply be good. He had to be mathematically, flawlessly superhuman. He was contractually and culturally required to be physically immaculate at every waking second. The media vultures and the aggressive paparazzi constantly swarmed him, analyzing every single muscle fiber, every fluctuation in his weight, and every drop of sweat. The industry demanded that he not only perform physics-defying physical feats without the aid of hidden wires or camera tricks, but that he look like a sculpted, indestructible deity while executing them. He was carrying the colossal financial weight of entire movie studios, like Golden Harvest, on his severely depleted, chronically overworked frame. The studio executives saw him not as a pioneering artist or a complex human being, but as an exotic, highly lucrative cash cow that needed to be aggressively milked before the martial arts trend inevitably faded into obscurity. He was placed on an agonizing, impossibly high pedestal where vulnerability, exhaustion, or physical weakness were strictly forbidden. The actual human being was slowly being erased, replaced entirely by a marketable, invincible avatar that the public could endlessly consume without guilt. The psychological fracture of this man began long before his physical demise, and it was meticulously engineered by the very studio system he desperately tried to conquer. The breaking point arrived in the early 1970s, originating from both a physical trauma and a profound intellectual betrayal. In 1970, during a routine weightlifting session, he suffered a catastrophic injury to his sacral nerve. The doctors explicitly told him he would never practice martial arts again, condemning him to a life of bed rest. The physical agony was absolute, yet the psychological terror of losing his identity was far worse. During this agonizing period of immobility, he spent years passionately developing a visionary television concept about a wandering, philosophical martial arts master, navigating the violently racist landscape of the American West. He pitched it to major studio executives at Warner Brothers, pouring his entire soul, his intellect, and his rich cultural heritage into the project. The executives took his deeply personal concept, weaponized it for a white demographic, and locked him out of his own creation. They cowardly claimed that the American viewing audience was simply not ready to accept a Chinese lead actor on premium television. Instead, they handed his stolen creation to David Carradine, a white actor with absolutely zero martial arts background, creating the massively successful hit series Kung Fu. This was not just a ruthless business rejection. It was a profound, systemic betrayal that struck at the very core of his identity. It was a brutal, inescapable reminder that no matter how hard he trained, no matter how fast he moved, the Hollywood machine would always view him as secondary, a novelty act rather than a human being. This severe racial exclusion acted as a dark psychological catalyst. It drove him to a state of absolute, self-destructive obsession. He returned to Hong Kong not just to make movies, but to wage a total, uncompromising war against the Western industry that had humiliated him. He began punishing his own body, pushing his daily training regimens into the terrifying realm of clinical self-destruction, just to prove his undeniable worth to a system that fundamentally disrespected him. He ignored the screaming pain of his damaged spine, utilizing heavy medications just to force his body to perform for the cameras, refusing to stop the machine he had built. The supreme irony of his enduring legacy is how the global masses have actively participated in his psychological reduction. The modern internet and contemporary pop culture have violently flattened a deeply intellectual, wildly complex philosopher into a two-dimensional, bass-boosted aesthetic meme. Millions of fans mindlessly consume the high-pitched on-screen screams, the weapon sequences, and the stylized violence without ever once engaging with the man's profound mental anguish. He extensively read Jiddu Krishnamurti, he studied Western psychotherapy, and he wrote brilliant, layered essays on the human condition and the fluid nature of consciousness. Yet the viewing public only ever wanted the blood and the physical spectacle. The public relations machine actively fueled this intellectual ignorance, purposefully portraying him as a mystical warrior completely untouched by human frailty, depression, or chronic pain. They sold a robot that could punch through concrete, entirely erasing the poet who struggled with the overwhelming pressure of global visibility. When the biological tragedy finally occurred, the crowd eagerly swallowed the supernatural explanations, because a mystical curse is far more entertaining than a depressing story about corporate exhaustion, institutional racism, and catastrophic organ failure. The public's absolute apathy toward his complex humanity provided the perfect, impenetrable smokescreen for the entertainment industry to wash its hands of any responsibility. They transformed his actual, agonizing death into just another piece of mythological marketing, selling posters of his face while ignoring the autopsy report. The undeniable truth of his final days is a chilling, horrifying medical nightmare that the global entertainment industry has desperately attempted to bury for decades. Behind closed doors, away from the flashing cameras and the adoring crowds, the invincible dragon was physically and biologically disintegrating. Driven by the obsessive, trauma-induced need to look absolutely immaculate on camera, he reduced his total body fat to an alarming, biologically dangerous 1%. A human body requires a baseline percentage of fat just to protect vital organs and maintain basic hormonal functions. By stripping away his own biological armor to look shredded on cinematic film, he was inviting systemic organ failure. He was consuming massive amounts of raw meat smoothies and constantly experimenting with early electrical muscle stimulation machines. He would attach electrodes to his muscles and literally shock his own nervous system for hours, treating his biology like a malfunctioning car engine that just needed more raw voltage to keep running. Because of the chronic, agonizing pain from his 1970 back injury, he resorted to ingesting Nepalese hashish, not for recreational escape, but as a desperate, unprescribed muscle relaxant to stop his body from seizing up between physically demanding movie takes. But the fatal, irreversible blow was a closely guarded physiological secret that reveals the true, unvarnished terror of celebrity aesthetics. In late 1972, to maintain the flawless illusion of the perfect, unbothered warrior on the cinematic screen, he underwent an extreme, highly unusual surgical procedure. He had the sweat glands permanently removed from his armpits. He firmly believed that showing damp clothing on screen shattered the god-like illusion of his effortless power. The industry demanded gods who do not bleed and do not sweat. By medically eliminating his body's primary evolutionary cooling mechanism, he effectively sealed his own fate. On the sweltering, unforgiving afternoon of July 20th, 1973, during an intense script reading with producer Raymond Chow at the notoriously un-air-conditioned apartment of actress Betty Ting Pei in Hong Kong, the ambient temperature was completely unbearable. The humidity was suffocating. A normal human body would immediately produce heavy sweat to regulate internal heat, dropping the core temperature to protect the delicate tissues of the brain. His surgically altered body could not. He suffered an extreme, silent, and catastrophic heat stroke. Desperate to numb the sudden, agonizing headache that was viciously splitting his skull, he asked for a painkiller. He was handed a basic prescription medication called Equagic, a combination of aspirin and a muscle relaxant called meprobamate. Under normal circumstances, for a healthy, hydrated individual, this is a standard pill. But his severely dehydrated, chronically overworked, and rapidly overheating biological system reacted catastrophically. The lethal combination of severe heat exhaustion, extreme physical depletion, a lack of thermoregulation from the removed sweat glands, and the sudden introduction of the medication triggered a massive, unstoppable hypersensitive reaction. This resulted in acute cerebral edema. His brain rapidly began to swell inside his skull. Because the skull is a closed bone structure, the expanding brain tissue had nowhere to go. It crushed his own neurological pathways, severely restricted blood flow, and entirely shut down his central respiratory system. He fell asleep on the bed and quietly suffocated from the inside out. He did not die in a glorious, cinematic battle against rival martial artists on a rain-soaked rooftop, and he was absolutely not struck down by a legendary, mythical assassin from the shadows. He died because he was a fragile human being who was driven to physically dismantle his own biological safety alarms just to meet the impossible, aesthetic demands of a ravenous entertainment industry. The studio machine demanded a perfect, unsweating god, and the man surgically sacrificed his own biology to provide one. The official autopsy revealed a brain that had swollen by an astonishing 13%, an undeniable medical indicator of acute physiological trauma and heat stroke, not a supernatural hex. The system drove him to chase a level of perfection that human DNA simply cannot sustain. When his body inevitably gave out, the industry panicked, orchestrated a chaotic media circus of a funeral, simply printed more posters of his face, and continued to blindly collect the profits. This terrifying method of manufacturing icons is not an isolated, tragic incident confined to the 1970s. It is a standard, heavily protected operating procedure deeply embedded within the Hollywood factory. We see the exact same biological and psychological wreckage in modern actors who severely dehydrate themselves for days, denying themselves water until their skin is paper thin, or refuse to sleep for months, just to look suitably shredded for a superhero franchise or to win an Academy Award. The machine has not learned. It has only become more efficient at hiding the bodies. Decades later, in 1993, when his own son, Brandon Lee, was tragically and violently killed on the movie set of The Crow due to gross, undeniable negligence regarding a prop weapon, the media once again shamelessly resurrected the fake curse. They blamed a generational hex rather than holding the negligent studio executives, the rushed production schedules, and the cost-cutting producers accountable for bypassing basic on-set safety protocols. The entertainment industry continuously labels its fallen victims as cursed, crazy, or simply unlucky, conveniently ignoring the blood permanently stained on its own hands. It is a brilliant, sociopathic defense mechanism designed to protect the shareholders. When a human being is psychologically forced to carve away their own biological functions, to shock their own nervous system, and to ignore screaming spinal injuries just to remain relevant on the silver screen, we must seriously ask ourselves what we are actually applauding in the dark of the movie theaters. Are we watching the glorious triumph of human discipline, or are we witnessing a slow, highly publicized execution disguised as premium entertainment? The tragedy of Bruce Lee is the ultimate, terrifying testament to the lethal cost of global fame. The man successfully achieved cinematic immortality, but the non-negotiable price was his own physical existence. He famously told the world to become like water, to be formless, adaptable, and free-flowing. But the brutal, depressing reality is that he poured himself entirely into an empty cup for the world to drink, and the Hollywood industry boiled him alive until there was absolutely nothing left but vapor and mythology. Let me know your brutally honest thoughts in the comments below. Did he push himself over the absolute edge out of sheer, uncompromising ambition, or did the industry meticulously and ruthlessly design his biological downfall? When the screen fades to black, the real story begins. Subscribe to post-credit for more cinematic deep dives and untold Hollywood realities. Goodbye, and always question the memory of the masses.